Well, good morning, everybody, again, and welcome to the second annual Food Safety Summit. We're super glad that you're here. And this program, I'm standing at the podium because I'm really more of an audience member and facilitator than an expert, for sure. My name is Mike Droke, as you know, and I'm a partner in the food and agribusiness and cooperatives practice at Dorsey and Whitney. I have been had the privilege of starting, I guess, in the food industry, at least on the food services side, when I was 15 years old, and then worked my way up in Northern California, where I grew up near the salad basket of the world of Salinas, California. When I became a lawyer, I got a call from one of the partners. I was working in San Jose at the time, and they were looking for somebody they could throw at a new client and kind of have that person handle it and not have to deal with them anymore. And so I said I would do it and went down to Salinas and have had the privilege of working with Man Packing Company now for 27 years. So it's been one of the true blessings of my life. So I've been working in the food industry for a long time, and when Chip Magid, who's managing and is the head of this year's program, asked me to chair a program on blockchain, I thought he first was talking about Legos. No, as it turns out, that's not what we're here to talk about. So in any event, I'm of course only joking a bit, but what a fascinating topic, and really incredibly intensely timely this week for reasons we'll be talking about here today. So that's my brief intro. Ananth, do you want to talk about your background?
Yeah, hi, good morning. Ananth Krishnan. I lead technology, strategy, and architecture and innovation at Land Lakes. Essentially, what that means in plain English is we figure out what the real ask is from the stated ask, and then figure out what the technology answer should be to meet the real ask. And thank you for inviting me here.
Sure. So Tyler Mulvihill, I work for the largest blockchain startup in the world called Consensus. It's 1,000 people globally, offices in most major countries. And I co-founded a company which is being incubated by Consensus called Viant.io. And we are a blockchain-based supply chain platform. It's also a business process modeling platform, just really good at Providence. So excited to be here. One of the best run events I've been to in a long time. Thank you for having me.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bridget Hayden, partner in the patent group here at Dorsey, and I'm also co-chair of the firm's food, beverage, and agribusiness industry group, as well as a member of the firm's blockchain practice group.
And most importantly, Bridget gave me the perfect intro to today's program, coming from my neck of the woods. How many people here are familiar with the TV show Portlandia? Anybody? Have you all seen the chicken episode? For those who haven't, I'll set it up. It's a couple. They're going to be having chicken. They go to a restaurant in Portland, and there is on the menu a free-range chicken, which is they really appreciate, but they want to know more. They want to know, what's that chicken's name? Was that chicken really loved during its brief life here on the planet? Was it really tenderly cared for and the like? And so the server invites them to go out to the farm to actually see the free range. And so they get in a car. It's, of course, an eco-friendly car. And they drive out to the farm, and they meet the chicken farmer and talk to them for a while, et cetera, as they kind of vet the food that they've had. Portlandia is called, it's a kind of a new concept called a mockumentary. So it's a documentary, but in a mocking way. And I will tell you, being from Seattle, I grew up in Santa Cruz, California, and spent a lot of time in Portland as well. There's no mocking. This really happens. So in any event, talk about supply chain intimacy. Wow. So as we kick off this program, my first question to the panel was, what is blockchain? We hear about it. I see it in the news. Is it one word or two? I mean, so can you, Ananth, give us, so you're an audience member, you're obviously an expert in food safety and the like, but you're going back talking to the yahoos at the office trying to explain this thing. How do you explain it?
Okay, so the analogy I can think of for blockchain is if you implemented blockchain, you could not play the phone game. The reason for that would be that the first person who said, everybody knows what the phone game is, right? Okay, so the first person who said something, it would be digitally locked. It would be visible to everybody else in the chain. And everything every other person said along the chain would be added to that chain. So you would know who changed the message all along the way, all the way to the end, right? That's the most simplistic analogy I can think of about that talks about what is a blockchain and what kind of problem does it solve. The visual that you see up there is acknowledging copyright. It came from the IBM Institute for Business Value Analysis, and it shows the problem on your left and the solution on your right. And there are many examples. The fintech, and as Tyler will talk about, I'm sure, is a good industry where blockchain has done some really solved some real problems. So if you look at a mortgage and all of the stakeholders that are involved in the mortgage and all of the data that needs to be exchanged, if you look at the left side and the number of arrows that talk about data movement, and if you put that over time, and all kinds of things are moving from point A to point B, and there's no one copy, and eventually by the time you need something, and this is actually a real use case of somebody that could not be evicted because the original document was missing, right? If there is a blockchain, which is on the right side, the provenance of that would be digitally locked and available from beginning to the end. And that's essentially what a blockchain, that's essentially the kind of problem blockchain solves.
So Tyler, when you're out explaining what Viant.io does to lay customers, how do you describe what blockchain is?
Yeah, so first I lay down the foundation that if I was to explain the internet to you back in the early 90s, in the way that people explain blockchain, I would say that the internet is a way to send digital packets of information across wires to distributed nodes around the world. And that wouldn't mean anything to you today as it wouldn't back then. So when people say blockchain is a distributed database, append-only distributed database where you can only write and read to the end of the database, it doesn't mean anything to most people unless you're a technologist as well. So I say, first of all, who cares really what it is? The real question is, what does it do? So then I'll give some examples, like the land registry or the land title example is a really good example. But if you want to go more of a macro level, it enables cross-organizational trust and coordination like never before. So we could have done digital bill of ladens back in the 80s. The issue is that if the Port of Singapore Authority created this digital bill of lading network, nobody else would join it because they created it. There was no input from anyone. They control it. So now for the first time, what blockchain allows is that everyone can have control over this source of truth without any one person or organization having the entirety of the control. So now, if you imagine a supply chain, so the traditional linear supply chain, each one of those participants has a database with their version of the truth. And the issue with traceability a lot of the times is that you have like EDI or messaging bus that go one up and one down, but there's no real cross-organizational control or cross-organizational transparency. But if you have blockchain, you can have each of those participants build a process flow or a workflow together where the rules are written and everyone knows them and sees them. And it just allows for organizational efficiency, it allows for trust and transparency, it allows for instantaneous forwards and backwards traceability, et cetera, et cetera. So blockchain is a way for cross-organizational coordination like never before, enabled by this new technology, and who cares how it works.
So Bridget, as a professional whose job is to take complicated technology and explain it such a way that even a patent examiner could figure it out, how would you describe what blockchain is?
Right, I was going to say, as your patent attorney and as a technologist, I would define blockchain as an encrypted distributed ledger that can only be changed upon network approval. And as an optimist for blockchain, I think that it provides opportunities for technical advancements and creates industry competition for developing solutions.
So, kind of a corollary question, and this came up, Ananth, from our conversation last night. You'd mentioned that there are open and closed blockchains. Can you describe what that means?
Yeah, the question was what are public versus private, or the answer was public versus private blockchains, because one of the attorneys asked me, well, if anybody can get onto it and do something with it, how do I want to participate in it as a company? And I'm sure Tyler has a more detailed question, being a blockchain provider, technology provider. But essentially, when people talk about blockchain, they confuse it a lot with cryptocurrency, which is just one manifestation or one vertical on top of the blockchain technology. The word that I've seen used in the industry is called the business blockchain, which is kind of a semi-private blockchain, if you will, where the network of participants typically will be known and trusted, and the data that they will share on the chain will be known and trusted. So some of these issues that crop up in the media about what are essentially public blockchains probably won't manifest themselves when it comes to business blockchains. So I'll pass it on to Tyler to add.
Yeah. So right now, there's a few challenges with blockchain, specifically Ethereum, which if you think about blockchains, there's Bitcoin, which you probably all have heard, which is a single use case for the transfer of money or the transfer of value. But the Ethereum blockchain is this platform where it doesn't have any innate functionality, but you can build applications on top of it. So consider it like the Apple iPhone store. So to tell the difference between public and private internet or blockchains, I use the example of intranets back in the 90s versus the internet in the early 2000s. So back in the early 90s, the same exact problems, scalability and privacy, were challenges in the internet. So people would be crazy, or companies would be crazy to put their unencrypted information on the internet. And that's why they built these intranets until HTTPS came along and solved that problem. So we're hoping that the same thing happens with the current blockchain ecosystem. But the internet is what really changed the paradigm of trade and information globally. It wasn't the intranets. These private networks aren't really going to scale, and they're not going to realize the exponential value that you get with a global connected network. So the public blockchains, what people are very wary to build on right now, and why the IBM Hyperledger project and a lot of these closed networks are gaining a lot of steam, is because you can build in these private permissioned instances where you know who the actors are, you know what people are going to do, you know you can kick people out, you can bring people in, there's a governance structure there, much like the legacy world. But where I think we're headed, if you believe in this intranet and internet example, is that there will be a main net or a public blockchain that everyone can plug into and get that exponential value. So one of the things that I talk to about our clients is that I work with some of the largest CPG companies in the world, like top 3, where we're tracking many things for them, not public yet, but hopefully in early 2019, along with like the World Wildlife Fund, where we're tracking tuna, and GlaxoSmithKline, where we're tracking biologicals and licenses. So what they're building right now are private permissioned instances, but these big companies have the best supply chains in the universe, but nobody knows or nobody can see them. And consumers are starting to demand, like there's this exponential demand for provenance-informed products. And what better way to take advantage of your supply chains, which typically have been these opaque, monstrous, kind of hide it in the closet and just put the pretty package in front of the consumers. It's a huge asset. So this is for the first time you can use blockchain to get operational efficiencies by cross-organizational coordination, and you get to show a transparent supply chain which customers are demanding. So this is, I was trying to get a question earlier to all the lawyers on the board, but this is very scary to a lot of big companies because you are exposing a lot of data that you typically wouldn't, but it could be the only way to get exponential value and to survive. And to beat Amazon.
You know,
A lot of
a couple
information there.
a couple of interesting kind of questions that derive from that. First is, it sounds like, you know, the Ethereum network could potentially be the kind of solution that HTTPS provided in the
Exactly,
open
yeah.
internet situation, right?
Yeah.
And then, Ananth, you had a great example of kind of how this would, how it would work from a perspective of somebody, you know, has their college transcript, for example, and say, this is Mike Droke, this is what his background is, and so I could set up a blockchain. Can you kind of walk through how that works, just to give an illustration of how the system works from a practical perspective?
Yeah, so there are going to be some industries that are going to be ripe for adoption of technology like this. And the credentials industry, if I can label that, is a very good one. Because there is a clear sequence of issuers of credentials, owners of credentials, which is the students that get the credentials, and then the need to be able to verify what the credentials are. And you can think about any kind of credentials, right? So it's kind of a clean value chain there. So you could think of a potentially public value chain, to Tyler's point, that has credentials the life cycle of the provenance starts with credentials being issued. And it's digital, it's on the chain, it's available to quote unquote anybody. Questions like, well, whose data is it? If it's my credentials, do I get to control who sees it, who doesn't see it? So I get to control who sees it and who doesn't see it, but I don't control what's in it. So it is trusted because it's certified by, or the certification is by the issuer. And then as additional credentials get added or things get noted, the subsequent issuers add to that chain, right? That is an example of one of the use cases where this technology is ripe. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating because, you know, you have example being the educational institution, and they say this is the truth as it existed at that time, and it can only be modified with their agreement and also yours. And so at each one of those entrance points, whether it's the beginning of the chain or the things that might modify that chain, there are a series of decisions that need to be made about who owns it, who owns the right to modify it. You know, from a lawyer's perspective, I think about things like version control management, which we've, you know, dealt with as lawyers for a long, long time, and who has the access rights and the rights to manage the data point, which goes really to the trust embedding that Tyler referenced.
So one additional thought there that just came to me is when you hire experts that have education, that have obtained their education abroad, right? It's a very significant topic in the immigration process, right? Are they who they claim to be in terms of qualification? Putting something like this would remove that problem.
So when you look at, I'm kind of skipping to the next slide. As Tyler said, you know, we could have done certain things back in the 80s, right? But Ananth, can you kind of walk through this slide generally, and then I'll ask Tyler the same question about what new element does blockchain address that wasn't handled by a traditional ledger management system?
Yeah, so that is, instead of reading through that, that's the content is pretty academic there. But really, I think of I have an acronym that I use, PICS, PICS, right? So Tyler and I have used this word provenance before, right? Provenance is just something that when you have a network of collaborators that are in a value chain that are trying to provide value to a customer, provenance is a problem that is has been hard to solve, sorry. So a technology like blockchain will solve that problem. The second thing is immutability. That's the I, right? Which we've kind of been hinting at. Once it goes on the chain, you can add to it. You can add a revision or a version to it, but what's in there does not change. The third thing is consensus. So there are different ways consensus is established in a public blockchain versus a semi-private blockchain. But the participants essentially agree that whatever is certified to be on the chain is correct. So you don't have to go back and question it again, because the immutability and the consensus guarantees that when you see what you see, it is what it is, right? And the last thing in a business blockchain is it's a single shared source of truth. I don't have my copy, referring to the example that Tyler talked about before. I may have my copy, you may have your copy, and everybody in the chain might have their copy. But the shared truth is in one place, and there's no debate about what that is.
So Tyler, from a perspective of the investment return to a client, in particular in the food and agribusiness industry, I guess two questions really. First is, are there any features that you would add to this? And then second, what's the order of importance from the business perspective?
Really good and hard question. So the technology that we built is a platform. So you can build many solutions to solve many different problems. So you can go after the efficiency gains, you can go after the revenue generators. I think that when you prove provenance, consumers, I mean, this is no secret, will pay more if they know where their food is coming from. So if they know that it's organic and they know that it's local, or they know that it's been protected from the cold chain perspective throughout the entire life, I will pay more for that product. So if you want to go after top line, you can develop a solution that kind of satisfies that. If you want to go after efficiency gains, you can build a solution like that. I think for right now, operational efficiency is where most people are going towards, because it's easy. You have 3 participants in a network. They have a warehouse full of people that reconcile either their contracts or their IP, or where things are going, if things have arrived. Supply chains are complex. If you can repurpose those employees back to the core business, you can show very easily an FTE calculation. That's the easiest way of doing it. So we see 2 different clients. We see the art of the possible, the innovation teams. They have a budget and they want to test something, and then you have the efficiency gains. It's really the business people that have real business problems that are trying to solve, that have clear ROI goals. But from our perspective, we're a platform, so like build whatever you want. That's my pitch.
So Bridget, I'd like to, moving to the next slide, ask you, what are the kinds of trends that you're seeing in the area of the business requirements and consumer and business demands that are kind of forcing this new technology?
Sure. So if everybody remembers this past spring when we had the E. coli, the largest E. coli outbreak in 10 years with the romaine lettuce issue that started in the Yuma, Arizona region, and we had no food recall from the FDA as a result of that. Some of the stores would pull the romaine lettuce off the shelves, but not all of them would, because there was not an official recall. And part of the reason for that was the FDA couldn't trace back to the source of the contamination. And as a consumer who probably buys a bag of romaine lettuce every week, I would look at the bag and I would realize, oh my gosh, the bag says it was grown in California or Arizona. It didn't tell me, what I wanted to know, that it wasn't grown in Arizona. So, from a legal standpoint, but also a consumer standpoint, we're just becoming more demanding of where our food is coming from. And, this trend is also happening in just brand management for, determining country of origin, organic status, non-GMO, and also in like commodities management. It's pretty common to get a better price for identity preserved seeds. So if we can keep a higher protein content soybean with other soybeans of that kind, we can get a different price. So, all of these areas that I've just touched on could be benefit using blockchains. So yeah, that's.
I love the visual of reading the package, and it says this was grown in the ground, or maybe hydroponically, but in any event, it's good, and you'll love it. So, it's in other words, it's the consumer demand, separate from regulation, separate from pulling things back through the supply chain. Sometimes the consumer demand is really what drives the innovation. For the reason, really, Tyler, that you said, you can get a better price if you can have something that's trustworthy and the like, and can follow it through the food chain. And you had with your company a test of this. So I put the bait to plate slide up here. I thought it was just fascinating. And can you describe first what was the genesis of the project? Why did you start this?
Sure. So when we first built a minimum viable product and we wanted to test it, we got a couple partners. So those were the GlaxoSmithKlines of the world, and one of our partners was the World Wildlife Fund. And they connected us with a longline fisherman in Fiji by the name of Brett or Blue Haywood. He owns 7 vessels, and he catches yellowfin tuna and albacore tuna long line in sustainable waters in Vanuatu and in Fiji. And so he wanted to prove the provenance of his products. He tried this back in the 80s as well, in the early 90s. But again, the same problem. There was not that cross-organizational coordination that was enabled by blockchain. So he said, let's try it again. So we got a local Fijian to build a blockchain app on top of Viant, so build the custom user interface using our technology. We had Blue open up his supply chain to us, and then we created a business process, which you can see here. So you can see that first the fish was caught in the sustainable waters of Vanuatu. Then the landing of it was approved by the government at the docks. Then it was officially landed. It was received by the processor. It was processed. Then it was packed. The fish was sold, and then it was eaten. And to demonstrate this, what we did, one of the coolest things I've ever personally done, I think, I imported 250 pounds of yellowfin tuna and albacore tuna to Brooklyn from Fiji in 2 days. And we had a conference with 1,000 people, and we showed the provenance of that fish that the people were currently being served, so 1,000 people. And along with your bamboo boat with sushi and wasabi in it, you had a QR code attached to the napkin. And you could scan the QR code, and you could see, if you see the iPhone on the right, that it was this XYZ species, that it weighed this much, that it was caught at this geolocation. And then the amazing part of this wasn't really the reaction of like, oh, this is great, like I'm very elated that this information is out there. It was total confusion. Like, is 2 days good? Like, I have no idea. Doesn't fish go bad if it's 2 days? Like, was it cold the whole time?
My grandfather told me fish and guests smell after 2 days.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was usually on the 3rd day of my visit, but that's another story.
And then we got feedback like, can I tip this? This is the best sushi I've ever had. Where can I buy it? How can I leave a comment? Because I think there could be a break in this chain. And I was like, whoa, this is for a demonstration. But as I think companies open up their supply chains, you're going to get consumers re-engaged with the brand, which is huge, because consumer engagement or attention of your consumers is of absolute value right now, with our attention going to Facebook and Instagram and other platforms. But if you can get that consumer engagement while getting your supply chain more acceptable to your consumers and getting instantaneous feedback, I think that was the real kicker that I was not expecting. I thought people were just going to enjoy the sushi and say that was cool, but they were begging me to go back and talk to Blue. I was like, this is one guy in Fiji. Relax.
He's out on a boat right now.
Yeah. And this was done with RFID tags too. So at each of these different points, when it's caught, landed, and received, they would scan the RFID, and that would create a transaction on the blockchain that you couldn't change. So you know that if there was a lie, at least it was an auditable lie.
And the entrance point of the beginning of the chain was what?
Actually catching the fish. So if you want to go online and search WWF blockchain and bait to plate, and you can watch this 5-minute documentary. But as soon as the fish is pulled up, an RFID tag is attached to the fish that is with the fish the entire time, and it's scanned on the boat. So you actually know the geolocation of where that fish is caught, and that it's in sustainable waters.
Wow.
Yeah.
There have been other tests as well, and Bridget, this slide comes from the IBM test on mangoes, and I had some questions about it. First, why would they start by testing mangoes?
So mangoes commonly carry listeria. So it's important to be able to trace back a source of listeria if there's an outbreak.
And then, of course, when they're processed, that means cutting through the skin of it, which could carry the listeria into the fresh product itself, right?
Exactly.
And what did the mangoes have to tell us?
So in this IBM example, the fresh sliced mangoes were tracked from farm to store aisle, very similar to what Tyler was explaining in his previous example. And but they tracked the mangoes two ways, and just to let you know that none of these mangoes were tested positive for listeria, but they were just trying to show that using blockchain could work in this scenario. So when they traced the sliced packaged mangoes from farm to store aisle in the one-up, one-back tracking method, which is this manual link-by-link tracking, it took them 6 days, 18 hours, and 26 minutes. And when they built a blockchain over the course of 30 days, and it implemented over that time, and they executed the same search function, it was completed in 2.2 seconds, basically in the blink of an eye.
What were the challenges that they found?
The challenges they found was that you need to get agreement with your suppliers to engage in the blockchain efforts. So at that 30-day period of building it, it takes some time to get all of the data into the system. But once you have it there, like our guests have spoken about, it's there and it's secure and it's a single source of truth.
So we had an announcement this week from Walmart. To any panelists, you want to talk a little bit about what that announcement was? So Ananth, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, so Walmart made an announcement that starting September 2019, which is about a year from now, all of their leafy green suppliers will have to be on the Walmart blockchain, which they had the Mango pilot was on the IBM platform, and that's what Walmart is standardizing on for now, and they're requiring, right? So this is a stake in the ground, and leaders like Walmart are going to push to move industry participants forward in the adoption of technologies like this.
We were very grateful for this announcement as panelists. Obviously, it literally was made, the PR wire hit, while we were on a phone call preparing for this program. So couldn't have been more timely from our perspective. Tyler, what implications do you think that announcement have on the industry generally?
Yeah, so I think it's wonderful because Walmart is the largest producer. Walmart and Sam's Club are largest buyer of food in the world, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not the food expert here. So them putting a stake in the ground validates that this technology is something that is not relegated to the dark aisles of cryptocurrency, but is now at the forefront of innovation. I think it's fantastic for my business because now I can go in and say, nobody got fired by hiring IBM, let's take a risk and let's do something real. I think it's not as big of a news as it probably comes across, because it's like not every single supplier in 1 year is going to be able to do this. But I think it's a great ask. I also think that Big Blue has done this in the past successfully when they were competing against Apple with their personal computers. And I think Apple's stake in the ground was you can't have one person control everything because when you start feeling that, it doesn't feel right. And which is why I said earlier that when you go from these intranets to these internets, or the public mainnet version, you're going to get exponential difference in value. And I say that because right now the value of this really goes back to obviously the consumer, but also to IBM and Walmart, and the truck drivers and the farmers and everyone else who adds value to the supply chain might get a little bit of value, but not the value that they probably could get if there was more competition and there was more places for them to sell their goods, and there was a way for me to say, this is the best mango I've ever tasted. I want to tip that farmer because I want to make sure that they continue supplying to Walmart versus this other mango that I tasted 2 weeks ago. So I think in the future, it's going to look way different than this, but I think it's fantastic news.
You know, it's fascinating. I'm looking through the PICS acronym, and this is why I asked Tyler you the question about how did the provenance get created? You know, how do we know that it was this farmer and the like? And so, what do you see as far as embedding that provenance in at the entrance point to the supply chain? I've got an example here. Bridget, do you want to describe what this example is?
So this was published by the FDA in response to consumer requests to understand what happened in the E. coli outbreak connected to the romaine lettuce. And it basically traces a few of the E. coli cases back to the farm level, and then, from where the people were infected. And it just shows the complexity that the FDA was dealing with and the incomplete records that they had access to.
As I look at it, I had a couple of questions. First, I guess to Ananth, in your wonderful description, PICS, where do each of those occur in this chart?
Okay. So this picture from left to right, the consumer is on the left, and the extreme right side are all the individual fields from where, in this example, lettuce is being picked. So for this to work, every one of those fields and the operators on those fields would have to be digital, and every head of lettuce that is picked would have to have an identifier, a digital identifier, similar to the RFID example on the fish. So that's the provenance, that's where it was picked. It doesn't tell you in this story what happened before it was picked, but let's just start there, right? So that goes on the blockchain, and from there, you know where that head of lettuce came from, right? Because it's locked there, right? From there, it gets onto a truck, and now the next piece of information could get added. Was the truck at 33 degrees the entire time? And I pick 33 degrees, because let's say that's what the temperature needs to be, right? You could track that, right? Again, provenance, traceability, right? The immutability is part of the platform. Once it goes there, it doesn't change. Because the technology offers this consensus mechanism, whatever that might be, before everything is certified to be on the chain, it goes through a verification process that says that data is valid, right? So you don't have to guess when you go back and look at it whether, wait, it went from 33 degrees to 37. Was it really 37? No, if it went there, then that was certified and it's valid. All kinds of questions will come up as you think through that story. But I'm giving you a glimpse of how that PICS might play out, right? Tyler called out some of the questions that the people eating the fish thought about, right? What about this part in the chain? What about this part? How do I really know this happened? One thing that has come up in this fish or anything similar is there a way to take that RFID off one fish and put it on another fish? How do you prevent that, right? So there's all these supplementary or additional questions that will come up, but does that give you a feel for how provenance and consensus and then single source of truth.
Yeah, and this is why, Tyler, I had asked you the question earlier
Yeah.
about how the RFID chip gets attached and how you know that it did. And so it seems that one of the kind of fundamental questions is, what's the point of the start of the chain? And how do you attach that? Because as this illustrates, if you have one farmer, which in the fish to plate, it's one thing, but multiples. So how do you envision that getting addressed in the technology?
Yeah, so this is the question about how do you attach the physical to the digital, or how do you create a digital twin of a physical object? You can do it a million ways, and a lot of what we're seeing when we approach a client is that they're not even using the technology for the first month. What they're doing is that they're trying to coordinate with their vendors and figure out what the process is, and figure out where the holes are. So you can use RFID, you can use NFC. We've seen there's an example where they use a QR code that's laser burned into avocado skins. You see now there's new DNA spraying. I don't know what that means or what that could be. It's kind of scary. But figuring out what mechanism you want to use depending on, you're not going to put an RFID tag on a piece of or on like an individual package of toothpaste, because that is going to make those razor thin margins disappear. So you're going to have to go and you're going to have to use things like Digimark, which some consumer packaged goods companies are just starting to adopt, and that's basically a QR code over the entire packaging that's embedded in the image of the packaging, so you don't even know it's there. So it doesn't take up extra space on the packaging. But as soon as we create any asset on our platform, a digital version of that is created, and that can be attached to an RFID or any other mechanism. But it's the process. It's not a tech problem. It's a process problem.
And that kind of leads to my next question on the next slide, which is, from having seen other evolutions of digital or other types of technology, how fast do you see the acceptance rate in this technology?
Is that a question for me?
Yes.
Heck yeah, I can. I think it's going to be incredibly slow and then incredibly quick. There's a lot of pilots that are going on right now that are on the brink of turning into production, and they're probably going to test them out before they tell the consumers that this is on blockchain. And then there's a whole marketing aspect of, do people even care? And then what aspects of the blockchain should you show them? So I thought this was going to be a lot simpler, but as we're going down this road with our clients, it's becoming more and more complex. But we should be in production with blockchain application systems where the consumer can scan a QR code or a Digimark code or whatever it is, and look up that history, just like the fish, but maybe for another consumer good, as early 2019. So I think there's going to be production. There already are production use cases, I would argue, but they're going to be massive. There's going to be a massive amount of them in 2019, and then an exponential amount of them in 2020, 21.
And so, Ananth, you're nodding your head, and that leads me to somewhat of a question, because one of the things that Tyler referenced was that the first part of the project is to figure out what's already out there. Like what are methods that through our supply chain people already have, so that the adoption will be presumably more rapid and cost effective. So, Ananth, from your perspective, what could people be doing now to get their head around how likely is this to happen in my business and industry, and so I can be prepared when that question's asked?
Yeah. As we talk through and look at the hype versus reality of blockchain, there's going to be two schools of thought. One is going to be this promising, it's coming, you better prepare for it, and the other one is going to look at all of the process problems and say, oh, we'll never get there. The truth is actually really in between, and it's going to manifest itself it's going to become real in industries where it is where the process problems and the data sharing problems are either kind of sort of already figured out and an acceleration is required, or where it's mandated or will be mandated or will be demanded either by regulators or by the consumers. So as I think through this in terms of how it affects other industries, I looked at the pattern of problems that blockchain solves and looked at what other industries have solved this traceability problem with cross-functional participants. And the two that popped to mind were medical vaccines in the medical industry, and automobile component tracking, right? If there is a recall for an airbag or for a vaccine, the the supply chain is as complex as any other supply chain, and they have a means, might be slow, it might be somewhat inefficient, but it's data rich, it's process rich, and it's mandated. Either as an industry practice, it's become the norm, or it's mandated because of a regulatory need, or it's mandated because of a consumer need. And all of this data and processes are kind of, sort of in place. What is not available is a fast way to make that data visible. Those industries, if you are associated with any of those industries that match those patterns, blockchain will come very quickly in that area to solve or to accelerate that sharing, accelerate the solution to that sharing problem. If you're in an industry which is different, so certain parts of the food industry is harder. So there's an anecdote, there's this marketing thing that marketing story. Scan your bar of chocolate, and an image of Betsy the cow pops up, right? That's a cute story. But if you think about the food industry or the dairy supply chain, you got one among 4,000 cows, and this came up in an earlier panel. The milk is co-mingled at the farm, then in the truck, then in the food processing plant. You have no way of, unless you take that Betsy cow's milk, put it in a sealed thing that can't be tampered with, all the way to, let's say, Nestle, and only that milk used is in that bar of chocolate, there's no way that you can do that, right? So the truth, so in some of these industries, it's going to manifest itself differently. So Tyler talked about EDI, which is a common technology platform that is used for data interchange. It's not the jazzy stuff. It's purchase orders, it's sales orders, it's shipment notices, it's all these operational things. Companies are already doing it. All those technologies I can see shifting to blockchain, and that's across industries, right? So I'm rambling a little bit, but it kind of, I'll pause there and have Tyler add on to that.
Yeah, do you want to? So I think those are all perfect points. The two that I would add is millennials right now, and the trend that we're seeing is that people are nesting, and this is my acronym for the day. Nest, natural, ethical, sustainable, transparent. So that's what people want in their products. And so if you can't deliver that as a company, who knows what's going to happen? And we'll talk about Clay Christensen's innovator's dilemma right now, where the big steel manufacturers were overtaken by the mini mills that started off building very simple things, and then all of a sudden they were taking over the Bethlehem Steels and the U.S. Steels, or the Kodak moments, or any of these. How do the big giants fall? So the big giants have manufacturing processes right now that are not set up to deliver this to their customers. So how do you do traceability right now in a plant? Is each head of lettuce washed individually, or are they all thrown into a bucket from 15 different farms within a 100-mile radius and then all washed together? Because as soon as that happens, that's a manufacturing processing plant traceability issue. Again, we're going back to the process, not necessarily a food issue or a tech issue. It's just how you're doing things, probably from either an SAP module standpoint, or just how things have evolved. So if you don't evolve to what the consumers are demanding, like this nesting that we're seeing, you're going to see companies like The Honest Company and Organic X, Y, and Z come start nipping at the heels and the profits of these big CPG companies that can't or won't make their supply chains transparent.
And do you see, from a perspective of either what kind of product or what type of company is more likely to be an innovator in this area?
Yeah, I mean, companies that are hundreds of years old and that have lasted through many cycles because of their innovation. I mean, I have the top 3 CPG companies. I don't have any doubt that they have many blockchain projects, and that they are thinking about this day in and day out. I thought you were going to bring up a brand. I was like, we can't say. I have no doubt that they're going to innovate. But a lot of this is going to be a step change in the way that they do business. I think that also they're going to be buying companies like we heard from in the earlier panel. They're going to be buying companies to get this exposure and to get this learning, and to start dabbling into these social media forward companies that are saying what ingredients in their end products and that are taking pictures of the plants and offering these immersive experiences that typically the industrial market media complex that these CPG companies have, it's not really working anymore.
I switched to the next slide because I think one of the big challenges that many companies face is getting the right people to agree to the right basic way of approaching a specific problem. Consensus ahead, buckle up, it's going to be a rough road. So Ananth, can you talk briefly to that kind of business practical challenge?
So I was thinking about this slide earlier this morning, and I said to myself, it's not so much business challenges because, as Tyler has called out, it's not a choice. So it's almost a business prerequisite. Yes, it is manifesting itself as challenges, and this has come up as a theme in just all morning about the complexity of food risk and where we are in our maturity. So the comment I wrote down this morning from Professor Boland was, we are still learning what is really happening from that head of lettuce to the cut lettuce. Then there was another example that was mentioned about the supplier having a contractor who happened to have salmonella issues, right? These are real problems, but they have to be solved. Otherwise, these companies will fall off the S&P 500, like it was mentioned this morning, right? So it's not a challenge that you get to choose whether you want to solve. It's a prerequisite, right? So companies are gonna have to think about how to add transparency, and there's gonna be a roadmap. You don't have to solve all of the problems all right in the beginning, but there is a roadmap. If you're a company that makes baby food, it's probably a little more urgent than if you're a company that's making something that's not as sensitive, right? But the problems are still the same. You have to start from the beginning, and you have to draw the arrows of what happens to that product, to the entire supply chain, and you have to digitize every step of it, no ifs, ands, or buts. And if you have participants along the way that are not able to become digital, they have to fall off, and the digital ones will take place. The other dimension of it is that this will introduce cost to the value chain, right? And as much as the Nest example is there, if that bar of chocolate or of that can of milk, if it costs $9 instead of $3, there is a question. There's going to be a point in the consumer's mind where they're going to evaluate value, and the system will have to figure that out. The parent will probably pay $9 for a baby food, but if they're buying bread or adult consumption, maybe they'll think about it. So these are kind of some of the perspectives.
So Bridget, can you address some of the legal challenges that you foresee in implementing blockchain?
Sure. Well, just first off, Dorsey has a blockchain and digital assets group at the firm, and we've got a wide range of attorneys that belong to various practice groups that can address the legal issues in this area. From my perspective, I could see blockchain used, is it for innovation, for example, for patenting, but also I could see blockchain used for tracing back in different business processes or just steps that were taken. And in patent law, patent infringement is determined by matching up the steps that are taken in a manufacturing process, for example, with a patent. And so if you have a very granular level of information in a blockchain, it would be very easy to trace back infringement of a patent. So that's what fascinates me the most is what level of granularity are companies going to adopt in their blockchains? And so that's one area. And the other thing that's really exciting for me, from a patent attorney perspective, is in patent law since 2014, software has been basically stopped from becoming eligible for patenting. And I spoke with Ananth about this in depth. But just this week, the U.S. Patent Office director said that they were going to change their view on subject matter eligibility. And blockchain is an inherently technical innovation. And one of the things the director said is, if you're implementing your solution in a concrete way, i.e. in a technical solution like blockchain, it should become eligible for patenting. And so looking at the Patent Office site today, there are 67 patents that have issued with the term blockchain or distributed ledger in their claims. And there are 650 published applications that are waiting to be examined and determine whether they get patented or not. So for me, it's a really exciting time in patent law, because this could be something that sort of breaks the dam from 2014 until now. It's very, very exciting for me.
And I was looking at it from a slightly different angle of the antitrust concerns. And, anytime you have this level of collaboration, there's always a question about, does it become anti-competitive? And, what we've seen evolutionarily happen is that a lot of times you end up with industry groups. Dorsey represents IEEE, for example, where the industry group comes in and says, okay, we're going to set a standard here. This is what we think is the appropriate standard, whether it's for a thumb drive, USB port, or other kinds of technology. And this strikes me, much like Tyler, your parent company, has done, is to set up a true standard that multiple people can agree upon. So it'll be fascinating to watch the legal evolution that's going to be very quick, I think, in this area as, when the market forces, whether it be from the customer side or from Walmart and others, really end up driving the change. So I had a final question for each panelist, and that was, this is a lot of information in a short time, and people are going to go back and, if they've told their colleagues that they were going to come to this program, they're going to be asked the question, okay, great, but, what can we do today? So, Ananth, do you want to start with that?
So it's not a question of if, it's a question of when blockchain. So for all of us, I think it's the first thing we need to do is stay engaged and know what is going on in the industry and how these technologies are developing, and try to draw a map to what is happening in the technology, to what your needs are, and see where there is a matchup, right? And then start the discussion in your companies about playing with this technology in those areas. Because then when Tyler said it's going to be slow, and then it's going to pick up, you want to be ready for that, and you want to be ahead of the curve.
All right, Tyler?
Yeah, I thank you. I couldn't basically verbatim of what you just said. And if you want to do it from a business perspective, so you have a business idea, you want to use blockchain, call me. We have a platform that you can just pull a bunch of levers without needing to code and knowing anything about technology. If you can build a swim lane, or you know what a process flow is, or you're a subject matter expert in supply chain, and you know what asset you want to track, and you have users' roles and permissions, you can build a blockchain app in 15 minutes using our platform. So by far the fastest way to play with it. So call me, or if you have developers, you can use Kaleido, which is stood up on AWS, or go on Microsoft, spin up a blockchain, couple blockchain nodes, and start writing in Solidity, write smart contracts. If that's way over your head, you can call me.
So, here's how to do a smart contract.
Yeah.
I love it. Don't do the dumb ones.
Different-
We don't
different
recommend those.
Different pen. Yeah.
And then Bridget?
From a legal perspective, it's most helpful to get attorneys involved at the ground level so that we can help with the decision-making on things like the level of granularity that is put into the blockchain and the operating procedures that are used to back up the information that feeds into it.
Yeah, do that early.
Great.
Yeah.
So we have time for, I think, 2 questions. So anybody have particular questions? As you sit here and think, oh my gosh. Yeah, Greg.
I know nothing about this, but I'm just thinking, like, what if Microsoft decides to come up with a competing program to IBM, and then these 2 competitors like start advertising that one program is better than the other, and there are deficiencies, and it casts some trust issues into this whole blockchain thing. Does that undermine the effectiveness of this, or how do you feel about that?
So I'm going to recast the question just if they're taping. And the question is, what happens when you have the inevitable competition in solutions and each are contrasting and comparing their features to the other and claiming theirs is the only one that can be trusted when trust is such an important part of the, and really essential part of the blockchain, right? All right, who'd like to take that?
I can take that, at least for the first shot. So I'm Greg, I'm glad you're here. I was going to ask you the question about, would you be willing to decentralize and make your supply chain transparent, but we can get into that later. So Microsoft already has a blockchain offering, and Amazon has a blockchain offering. IBM has a blockchain offering. Hyperledger, which is underneath the Linux Foundation, has a blockchain offering. And Ethereum has a blockchain offering, and there's 500 other blockchain offerings, some with coins, some without. I think that we'll arrive at different trust frameworks for different problems, and there will be some sort of hybrid solutions. I use the example of intranet versus internet, but I think probably a better example is operating systems. So we have iOS and we have Android. They're not inherently bad. One might have more bugs than the other. One might have a smaller ecosystem than the other. We can all make calls, all download apps. So I don't think there's going to be a risk of. In fact, I would encourage that conversation, because if I'm building on the wrong blockchain, I'd like to know today rather than a year from now. But yeah, I think inherently blockchain is just very old technology. Cryptography's been around for decades. So is distributed databases.
Ananth, would you like to address that too?
Yeah, so I don't think there is, the answer will be one blockchain. The iOS Android example is a perfect one. The way it might manifest itself for let's say, a participant in a supply chain network is that they are participating in 2 blockchains or 3 blockchains to their customers, to their B2B, business-to-business customers, and they have to supply that data for the customer, depending on which blockchain they are on, right? Which is not different from how data is shared today. Now, I could envision a scenario where there is this public blockchain where all these blockchains all these blockchain technologies talk to each other, where that disparity goes away. But where it's not just wet cement, the cement has not been poured on it. So we don't know how this will shake out. But I think for now, the competition will not be about whose blockchain is better. It's going to be which blockchain platform or offering is better for what application.
All right, one final question from anybody? All right, hearing none then. Thank you to each of the panelists for such a fascinating program. I'm, as I expected, left with as many questions as I had answers, so that we'll look forward to the continued evolution. So thank you.